All right, welcome everyone. Well, we're going to talk about everyone's favorite subject here. I always say if it weren't for passwords and printers, I wouldn't have a job. So we're going to talk about passwords here. Let's see. All right. Many of you, most of you have probably seen this, a little quick introduction. I'm yep, I'm a member of our Senior Center Tech Connect volunteer group and through Longmont, the city of Longmont. In real life, I was a high-tech marketing guy. I do a lot of writing, and I was a programmer at one time, like COBOL and Fortran and those modern day languages. So I'm of our generation, but I ended up growing up with computers, and this picture to the right here is the first computer I started working with. And we're going to talk about that in a second. I'm a Mac guy, as most of you know, but if I must boot Windows, I will. Um, and by the way, I despise managing passwords. So this computer over here was an IBM 1620. It was introduced in October 1959. It had a clock speed of 1 megahertz, in other words, a million times a second. It was cycling compared to your phone today, which is about 4 billion times a second. So your iPhone, if you have an iPhone 17, it's about 4,000 times faster than this computer right here was back then. And if you have an entry-level iPhone 17, um, the memory size is 12 gigabytes, which is 2.5 million times more memory than this guy had. And needless to say, your phone does not take up an entire room like this thing did. So I always like to do this. This was in I started programming this in the mid 60s. My high school in Wyoming ended up with one of these things. So I actually have grown up with computers, more or less. So if you're familiar with my presentations, I always have a little thing that says, "Are you in the right place?" And normally there's a long list of things here, but this one is, you're in the right place if you're human. Humans are terrible at managing passwords. And I had ChatGPT create this little AI thing here. You can see it's kind of interesting. It's upside down that he's writing on it, but he's trying to think of a password. So let's look at today's plan. First of all, we're going to look at some best practices for managing passwords. We're going to look at manual password management, which many of us use. We're going to look at password managers, both built in to your system and third party. And then we're going to talk a little bit about passkeys. You may have heard of passkeys. It's an alternative to passwords, and it's quite the technology. And thank you, Daryl or Elmer, for letting people in. And then we're going to talk about how kind of choosing your password management method. So the primary objective is to evaluate which type of management system works best for you, and then more importantly, to implement it. Now, this isn't going to happen overnight. And you already know this, right? You're already managing passwords, and uh, it's an ongoing thing, no matter how you look at it. Whoops. We're also going to talk about passcodes, or excuse me, yeah, passcodes, like I mentioned. So let's look at best practices for passwords. First of all, and this is really important, never reuse passwords. The bad guys have long, long lists of username password combinations that obtained uh, either through hook or crook, or they've purchased it, or through data breaches for major websites. And if you happen to have one of those username password combinations that's been exposed, they take that and they test it against a bunch of other websites. So let's say you go to King Soopers and you use this password that you use all the time. It's got your email, and then you use this easy to remember password that you use all the time. And you also use that for Wells Fargo. Well, the bad guys can get into King Soopers. They'll find out your username and password. And guess what? They'll go try it on at Wells Fargo. And you can imagine what happens if a scammer from India has access to your Wells Fargo account. It's not pretty. So every website or online account should have its own unique password. Now, this is kind of a strong statement, and I violate this myself all over the place. But more for sure, accounts that you have that are important should have their own unique password, especially things like your Apple ID or your Microsoft account ID. That definitely should be unique. And things like your investment accounts, websites, and your bank websites all should have their own unique passwords. And you just can't remember them all. So, in fact, I have trouble remembering one, and that's why you need a good system for managing your passwords. And that's what we're going to talk about here. But the bottom line is don't reuse passwords. Now, we're going to talk about some methods of creating passwords that kind of work, but I recommend a password manager, and we're going to talk a lot more about password managers here in a bit. So creating unique passwords. If you have a password manager, they all have a password generation tool, which is again, you're going to get tired of me saying this. This is a preferred way of managing your password. And it will create unique passwords whenever you need them, and store them in the password manager so you don't have to remember them. Or you can use something like ad hoc phrases. Um, this is an example that I got from Karen Rademacher. We use 8 ounces of cheese when we made pizza Thursday night, and this comes up to be the password. Um, the idea is some kind of methodology that forms the basis for the password, and then some numbers or special characters that make it unique. I will tell you at this point, I can tell you because I'm not using it anymore. I used to have a list of all of the breweries in Colorado, and there's hundreds of them. And I would take the name of a brewery, reduce, take out all the spaces, put a number in front of it, and a special character at the end of it. So that's how I created passwords. So it was pretty easy. I would open this file that has all these breweries in it, and I'd go down and I'd say, okay, I need a new one. And I'd pick that one and do that little algorithm of taking the spaces out, adding the number in, exclamation point, and voila, I'd have a password. The point is that it was unique, and that's a good thing. Now, North, who's our resident cybersecurity guy, I told him that, hey, this is how I used to create passwords. And he goes, well, the bad guys now use AI, and if they found one or more of your passwords that look like that, their AI could crack it in nothing flat. So, North, if you know North, he always looks at the extreme. But he has a point, is that you have to be careful about these things because the bad guys can sort through your algorithm. Um, and this kind of falls along this line here. Use two unrelated words plus a symbol and a number. Of course, then we have to come up with these two unrelated words. And you're sitting here scratching your head saying, okay, what haven't I used before? And what are the numbers going to mean? And it still hurts your head to cook up these passwords. Now, you do want, if you're making up your own passwords, avoid the use of one uh, uppercase L, lowercase l, or uppercase zero, uppercase O, zero, lowercase o in passwords. And you've probably already encountered this. You've created a password that you think is just super, and you write it down, and then all of a sudden you can't remember either. Was this upper lowercase, or was this an O or a zero? I can't remember. So just try to avoid that if you can. So the other thing is to embrace multi-factor authentication, or sometimes known as two-factor authentication. Now, the advantage of this is it's immeasurable, because if the bad guys end up getting your username password combination, if you have two-factor authentication turned on, it will send you a text and say, hey, someone just successfully used your username password on, let's say, Google. Um, is that you? If it is, enter the six-digit number I just sent you. And if it's somebody in India that's got your username password, they are not able to get in because they don't have the six-digit code. Let's see. And some service use an authenticator app on your phone, like Microsoft Authenticator and Google Authenticator. I don't actually use these. I prefer to use this straight away two-factor authentication. Kind of a side note on that is if you do get out of the blue a authentication request and there's six digits, and all of a sudden your phone rings and it's your bank, or at least it says it's your bank, and it says, "Hey, we're just double checking our security. Can you give me the six digits that we just texted you?" Do not do that. It's the bad guys. No one will ever, ever, ever ask for that six-digit code. I always say the only time you can share that six-digit code is if it's with me and I'm sitting next to you. All right. So never, never share your authentication code with anyone, either through a text message or an email or a phone call. The other thing to think about is your username, which is generally your email address. I will say I used to just use RP Masson as my username. And I realized, and so many places will accept that. They'll say, oh, okay, I understand this string is your username, and then you have to enter a password. But I realized that I forgot which sites I used that username. So I started using my email address always as my username. So I use my personal Gmail as my username for these sites. Um, you may have encountered this. Let's say you're working for the Boulder County and you get a Boulder County email address. Uh, don't make that your permanent. Don't make that your permanent username at Wells Fargo or at Target, because someday you're not going to work for Boulder County and that email address will not be usable. And here you'll be stuck because you used it on a website. So use a personal email address as your username. The other thing is some accounts, Google is one of those, Comcast is one for sure, Xfinity, they require a secondary email address for password recovery. And I know I've encountered this with some of my clients here at SCTC. We actually have to go in and create an email address in order to log into Xfinity because it insists on having this secondary email address. And I generally put the word recovery in that email address. So you can see bobskismac.recovery@gmail.com. That really isn't my recovery address, but you can see it's a special address. I never expect to receive mail on it, but it's used for recovery. Uh, and don't forget to save that, right? And either in your password manager or in your manual password management, make sure you save this username and password. All right. And always we have to say um, some words about scams. Think before you type a password in. Did I go to this website voluntarily, or did I click on a link in an email or text message? And actually, I was telling Daryl before we started, I actually thought I was going to be giving the steps for scam safety presentation today, but that's upcoming. So look in our schedule for the simple steps for scam safety presentation. Anyway, you can see here from whatever CB is, maybe Community Bank and Trust. Hey, there's a problem with your bank account and it needs immediate attention. You won't have access to your funds until you create this verification process. Well, obviously, our first reaction is, oh, let's click on this and it'll ask for my username and password. Don't do that. Don't do that. My rule is never click on a link in an email or a text message. So if you're in doubt, stop. And so in this particular case, we say go to the websites through the front door. And that means actually go to Community Bank and Trust website and start there if you think there's some kind of problem with your bank from an email that you received like this. Don't click on the link that's in the email. Or you can call the number on the back of your card, but don't call the phone number that's in the message or in the text because it's just more of the same scammer stuff. All right, so let's look at some password management things. If there's anybody has any questions, you can just raise your hand virtually or whatever on the chat window. Um, so manual password management is just that. Generally pen and paper. And hang on, I gotta move the. Let's see. There we go. Um, pen and paper is not a problem. It's a tried and true method of managing your passwords. You just have to do it correctly because if you just let it run amok, you're in worse shape than when you started. So there's some hints here in using pen and paper. Um, they make password books. You can order them from Amazon or go to Best Buy or whatever. And they look like address books because they're alphabetical. They got little tabs and they work really well, actually. You can also use recipe cards, right? So you have a little box of recipe cards stored alphabetically. And the thing to avoid is just loose papers or sticky notes. And I do see this all the time, right? I go to somebody's house and I'm helping them, and there's a sticky note on the screen there that's their bank account password. You know, someone would have to break into your house and they'd have to be looking for a password on your screen or whatever, but still, it's not very secure to do that. Plus, these kinds of things, loose papers or sticky notes, tend to get very confusing because you don't remember if you change it where the old one is. Or should I scratch it out or throw the old sticky note away if I could find it? So make a note, use a notebook or index cards, and make sure to maintain those carefully as you're changing your passwords as you go along. So out of sight of prying eyes, that kind of goes on. Username, password, answer to security questions. There are websites that you can circumvent the password if you know the answer to some security questions. You know, you've seen these. What was your first car? You know, what's your favorite, I don't know, what's your favorite TV show? What's your first dog's name? Those kinds of things. Make sure to write those down as well when you create the account. Now, when you change it, and let's say I'm using a recipe cards, 3x5 index cards, just draw a line through the old password and put a date on there. That's the date you changed it, and then put the new password. And the reason you do that is there are some sites, Google is one of those, that actually will ask you for an old password if you don't know your new one. One of the security checks is say, well, give me a password that you used in the last year or so. And you can go to if you haven't erased it or blacked it out, you can go say, oh, okay, this is my old password. And I changed it in January. And that's part of the account recovery that you go through for Google. So just remember, and sometimes I hate to say this because I do the same thing. It just feels good to just, erase it because you're like glad you got a new one, or you're tired of the old one, or you're frustrated because you had to make up a new one. But try to resist that urge. Just take your pen and uh Elmer? Okay. Just take your pen and or pencil and lightly draw a line through the old password. All right. This, excuse me, this example here, you can see over on the right. Um, I adopted this from a presentation Karen Rademacher used to do. And this is, you can see Karen at Ravelry.com had a username of Karen Knitter 3 and this password right here. And in September 2023, she changed it. And here's the new password. So she crossed that out, drew a line down here, and said, okay, here's the new password. So this is how you should maintain the history of changes for a particular website. Again, upper lowercase, make sure I've seen some people put a line underneath a letter if it's an uppercase letter, which is a really good way to note it. But you have to make sure because sometimes you're in a hurry, you're just writing this stuff down, and now you've forgotten which is upper and which is lowercase. Um, and of course, the answers to security questions. And then, as you can see here, there's an entire um, card that's dedicated to this site, Ravelry.com. So she has a lot of room in the future for password changes. And of course, I mentioned note the date of the change passwords. So there's other options for manually storing passwords. You can use a Word document. You can use, I know some people that use an Excel spreadsheet, or you can use the Notes app. On the Mac, there's a Notes app. I think there's Evernote or something like that on Windows. These are all great ways to do it. Um, Give it an appropriate file name so you just have a single file that keeps track of your passwords and put it somewhere where you can remember what it is. A lot of times people change the name to something, it's like my favorite recipes .docx or .xls. And you just remember that, hey, my passwords are stored in a file called my favorite recipes. And that way, somebody that plows around on your computer won't be able to quickly locate all of your passwords. Often people print this document out or just open that as they need it. The advantage of opening the document as you need it is you can copy and paste from the document into a sign-in form. So if I open up Wells Fargo and I'm not using a password manager and it asks for my password and I'm like, I can't remember my password. I can open my spreadsheet, find Wells Fargo, copy that password and paste it into the form that's the sign-in form for Wells Fargo. And that's useful because you don't have to sit there and retype stuff all the time. All right, so that's kind of manually managing your passwords. And again, there's nothing really wrong with that. It's kind of tedious and it requires conscious maintenance in order to keep up with your passwords. But it does work and it's kind of, let's call it old school. It's it doesn't require a whole lot of new thinking of things, but it's and it works, but you have to keep up with it, right? So let's look at on-device password managers. And when we say on-device password managers, we're talking about on your iPhone, your iPad, your Android phone, your Mac, your PC. You probably already have a password manager built in. And the reason I say that is most web browsers and some operating systems, that is Mac OS, already have built-in password managers that are ready to use. So when we say web browsers, we're talking about apps that let you surf the internet. Chrome is the leading browser that most people use, but Firefox, Safari, Opera, all of those have built-in password managers, although you have to enable them to get them to work. Um, they are built in, and I feel that they are secure. So if you want to start using, let's say, the password manager that's built into Chrome, we're going to talk about how to turn that on. That's a really good thing to do. If nothing else, it will invent passwords for you, which is, as we talked about, is very useful. Oh, I mentioned this. Oh, Edge also has a password manager. The Apple ecosystem has a password manager built in to the operating system. And of course, you know me, I'm a Mac guy. It's really spiffy. It keeps track of everything. It keeps track of my credit cards. It keeps track of all of the Wi-Fi systems that I encounter. So if I come to your house and I've been there before, there's a really good chance that I can log into your Wi-Fi easily. Um, and one other thing about this, and this is actually really important, password manager function that's really important. Let's say you get an email from Wells Fargo and you, for some reason, space out the fact that Bobsky told you not to click on that link. And you do click on the link, and it takes you to Wells Fargo with three L's.com, and it asks for your username and password. Well, you might not notice that it was Wells Fargo with three L's. And
PA
it,
dermatologist?
let's see, there we go. You might not notice that and they got the covered wagon and the red Wells Fargo, and you're looking at this going, okay, this is the real deal. All I need to do is log in. Well, if you're using a password manager, the password manager knows when you're at Wells Fargo, and it will autofill your username and password for you. But if you go to Wells Fargo, it will not autofill for you. And if it brings up the login screen and it's sitting there and you're saying, wait, I'm used to having you fill this in for me. Why is it not filling it in? It's because it knows you're not at Wells Fargo. This is an important security feature that's often overlooked with password managers because it's not directly related to storing your passwords, but it's something to think about for deciding whether you want to use a password manager or not. It's an extra layer of security. Um, Also, most password managers, Mac OS, the Apple Password Manager, for example, will notify you if the username or password have been compromised. Now, what they do is in the background, they go out to the dark web and they search the dark web for your username. And if they find it, they compare the password that's stored on the dark web that's been filched from you. And if it matches, it puts a big exclamation point on that username password combination and says, look, this was compromised in a data breach. The bad guys know your username and password for this website. So that's another security feature that makes password managers more attractive, right? And I'll show you when we get done here. Um, I I don't practice very well what I preach. I have a lot of compromised username passwords. Um, and I'll explain it to you when I show you that. So this is how you would configure the password manager in Chrome. So I bring up Chrome and I log into my Google account, and you can see here, the first thing I do is I click on my user ID up here, the little icon for my account, and it brings up, hey, it brings up this thing on the side, this navigation bar, and I click on home, and it brings up this panel, and one of the things you can type is password manager. So hang on, there we go. And it tells me I have 154 passwords saved, and it tells me a little blurb about it. And if I click on that, it brings up, sure enough, the password manager. And you click on this little gear icon, which is our universal symbol for settings, and it brings up this panel here. And you can see one of the things it brings up is the password checkup. Some of your passwords are exposed in a third-party data breach. You should change them now. And it allows you to go in and change the passwords, or at the very least, it gives you a list of places you need to go and update your password. So this is the settings panel that comes up. And this is where you turn it on. You say, yes, I want to save the passwords that I enter when I go to a website. Um, yes, I want it to autofill. You can choose to turn these on or off. If you turn this one off, you won't have a password manager. But if you turn this one off, you still will have to use the password manager. But if you turn it on, it will autofill for you. And then this is to tell you that passwords have been compromised. So I turn all three of these settings on. In Edge, it's very similar. This is Edge. I click on my icon up here. I click, it brings up this little panel, and I click on passwords and autofill. It brings up this panel, and you can say, okay, I want the Microsoft Password Manager because I'm using Microsoft Edge. And it brings up this little panel, and you turn on auto save passwords and passkeys. And then you click on more settings, and you come up with this. And I turn on all of these things. For example, I want it to suggest strong passwords. I want it to show the reveal password button. Sometimes if you've encountered this, you go to enter a password and you can't really see what you're typing because they want you to be really, really secure. And all it does is irritate me. So this helps you see what you're typing. Scan passwords for leaks. Again, that's a security feature. And you can see these other options here. And again, I turn these all on. I think this is all in the handout. If you didn't receive the handout, I'll put it in the chat here when we get done. So you can see I turn those things on, then I turn all these things on. The same goes with your iPhone. I don't have the settings for Androids here, but if you have an iPhone, you go to all the way down in the settings to the bottom to apps, and then the password. This is the password manager app, and you can turn these options on. Now, there's another important thing here, and that is that the phone can tell that I have, for example, Chrome uh, and a Microsoft Authenticator on my phone. It's important to only have one password manager running. If you have multiple password managers running, let's say I use OnePass and I have a Mac, so the Mac's trying to do password management, and I'm using Chrome, and Chrome's trying to do the password management, it will get really confused, and you can end up with passwords splattered all over the place. So on your phone, you're able to select one password manager. On the iPhone, I'd heartily recommend using the built-in password manager. Um, and if you do have a Mac, turn on passwords. And what this does is this says, oh, if I'm on my iMac, say on my desktop at home, and I go to Wells Fargo and it asks me to save the password, I say yes. That is stored in the cloud in my iCloud account. It's encrypted, so not even Apple can read it. But when I go to my phone and I go to Wells Fargo app, it will autofill once I have it uses either Face ID or Touch ID to approve autofill, and it fills it in based on the password that's stored in iCloud. So this is kind of a seamless way of, well, it's just like everything Mac. It's all connected through iCloud, right? If it works on your phone, it works on your Mac. Uh, okay. And so I'm going to go back. When you click on this little passwords button, it brings up this little dialogue and you say, yes, I want to sync this Mac. So this is an example. So that's how to turn it on in the most frequent cases. this is an example of autofilling with Chrome. So I went to Best Buy and I used my demo email, which is bobskydemo@gmail.com. And I signed up for an account at Best Buy. And when I went to the password field, Chrome came up and said, "Do you want Google Password Manager to create a strong password to this website?" Now, notice that I had Google Password Manager turned on here, not the Apple one. Actually, I was doing this on a PC. So Google Password Manager becomes my default password manager. And I say, yeah, use strong password. Now, I could click on choose your own, and then I would scratch my head and figure out how to invent a password for it. Or I just let the Chrome password manager create this password for me. And you can see this is the password that it came up with. I don't know why it says password don't match here. This is the password that it came up with. So that's an example of having Chrome create a password for me. On Safari, it's the same thing. It just says use a strong password. You can open the password manager, but if I say use a strong password, and this is the password that it came up with right here, and I think this was also for Best Buy, um, and it stores it in the password manager because I don't want to have to remember or write this down anywhere. It's stored in my password manager. So that's an important thing about password managers is you never have to write anything down and you really don't have to memorize anything because it's always stored in your password manager. And if you can get onto your device, generally you can get onto your password manager. So in the case of my Mac, for example, I have a password to open my Mac. On a PC, you have a Windows PC, you have a PIN or a password to open it up. Which is why you probably don't want to use 1234 as your PIN for your Windows. Uh, Pick four digits that are a little harder to guess and write it down if you have to, but don't use 1234. All right. Now, there's also third-party password managers. What we just talked about are password managers that are built in to common operating systems like Windows and Mac OS and browsers. So those come with those browsers. They're always free and they work pretty well. But there are third-party password managers. Um, the advantage of them is, let's say you have a Windows PC and an Android. If you get a third-party password manager and install it on both, it has its own cloud synchronization and it will support password management across those disparate devices. I mean, an Android and a PC, one's made by Google or Samsung, one's made by Microsoft, so they're really not going to talk to each other. The advantage of a third-party password manager is that you're running that app on both devices. It often has extra features like answers to security questions and credit cards and passkeys and so on. And it, of course, has a built-in password generator. Most of these have a free tier as well as a paid tier. Free gives you limited access to some of these features. The paid tier opens up some other features like storing credit cards and that sort of thing. It depends on which one. Um, so before we talk about some specific third-party password managers, I mentioned this, try not to mix and match password managers. And this is very applicable if you have a third-party password manager. Let's say you've got 1Pass and you also have Chrome running, it's just going to get confused. So just pick one. And if you're using a third-party password manager, especially if you're paying for one, um, you probably would pick that one and turn the others off, which is what I just said here. On the Mac, turn off the browser managers and use the system password manager. So here's some popular password managers. Uh, And when I say popular password managers, asterisk, I mean as determined by our cybersecurity guy, North Rittner. And if you know North, the character North, he recommends these guys right here. And he's got, if you ask him, he's got reasons why. And I think he uses Keeper. I can't remember, but I think it is. But all of these are applicable for password managers.
Yes, he uses key.
Yeah, okay, thank you. A word about this before we go on to passkeys. There's going to be a learning curve. It's not terminal, but it can still hurt your head for a bit. If you acquire one of these password managers, or if you start using one on device manager, take it easy to start with. Make sure you only have one of them running and gently ease into it. Keep your manual list for as long as you need to. But when you visit websites and the password manager asks to save your password, say yes. And that site from then on will be managed by the password manager. Now, you may have a zillion other sites that you haven't visited frequently, or since you installed the password manager, you still need your manual backup. You still need your sticky notes or whatever it is. But try to work in the password manager over time as you log into your the websites that you use. And we can help you with this too. If you want to fiddle with one of these, just come see us at the senior center and we can help you with this. All right, let's talk a bit about passkeys. First of all, I'm going to ask if there were any questions. There's no chat. Anybody have any questions about password managers while we're here? No? Did I rattle on too quickly here?
No, you're fine.
Thank you, Christine. All right, so let's talk about uh, passkeys, which is the new upcoming smarter, safer sign-in method. And it really is, actually. Um, so there's a lot of problems with passwords, and we didn't cover all of them. But for me, the main thing is making up new passwords. It just drives me crazy. So let's say I create a password called a password that nobody will guess, and I'm using it at Wells Fargo, right? And I enter that in. So I enter my username, which is my email address, and then I enter a password that nobody will guess. Uh, and Wells Fargo says, okay, that matches what I have in my database. I'll establish a connection so you can withdraw money from your account. But is this really you? Well, there's really no way to know. Have I used this password somewhere else and the bad guys have gotten a hold of it? Was your bank's database hacked, or was this password used somewhere else and it was in a security breach? There's no way to know. Or worse, did you create a password that you can't remember, which is Wells Fargo would say, hey, no, I don't recognize this. Keep guessing. So that's the problem with passwords is that there's really no way of telling whether it really is you. Now, multi-factor authentication will help that because it requires another device. In other words, generally your phone or an iPad or something like that. That moves it up to like 99.9% sure that it's you, but it's still not perfect because someone could have that six-digit code, have obtained it uh, surreptitiously, and now you're stuck. So let's look at what passkeys are. So it's a new sign-in method that's based on what they call public-private key cryptography. And this was been invented, 30 odd years ago. The guys at the NSA or the CIA or something came up with this notion of a public and private key and a way to link them together. And so this is based on that. Um, on your device, it stores a private key. And that private key does not leave your device. It's not exposed anywhere on the internet. As a matter of fact, in both the new PCs, one of the reasons I'm going to go off on a tangent here. Um, Many of us ended up with Windows computers that wouldn't upgrade to Windows 11, right? They're Windows 10 and they wouldn't upgrade. And the reason is they didn't have this thing called TPM, Trusted Program Module, or something like that. The TPM actually stores passkeys in the hardware on your Windows PC. So, and the Mac has a similar piece of hardware. So that's one of the reasons that Windows 11 or many devices wouldn't upgrade to Windows 11 because you didn't have this TPM in order to manage passkeys. So that's a little note on the side. Um, in order to access the private key, you have to have some kind of validation. On my phone, for example, passkeys are enabled through my Face ID. So if I go to Wells Fargo and it's using a passkey, my phone will ask me for my Face ID. And once that's verified, then it will supply the credentials to Wells Fargo in order to log me in. We're going to talk about how that works in a second. Touch ID on some phones, like the iPhone SE or some Android phones. Worst case, the device pin. In other words, if I have a Windows 11 machine and it has a 4-digit pin to get in, the private key will be enabled through entering that 4-digit pin. Another reason not to use 1234 or 0000. Okay, I'm just saying. There's also hardware security keys, which are actually little USB sticks that are plugged in that are unique to you, and it will allow you to enable a passkey. And it does eliminate the need to remember or type passwords. You don't need a password for a site that has passkeys enabled, and you have the private key stored for that site. So let's look at how they work really quickly. And the other thing is this passkey kind of has a password. It's 1,024 character password. So you think 12 characters is hard to crack. 1,024 is basically impossible. So when you first sign up for a passkey, let's say I go to Wells Fargo and it says, "Do you want to enable passkeys?" And I say yes. It creates a private key because I'm running the app on my device that stays on what they call the client. My device is the client on my Mac or my iPhone. And then there's a public key that's stored on the server. These two are connected, but they can't read each other's keys. So the public key has no knowledge of what's contained in the private key and vice versa. So at login, the server, you go to wellsfargo.com, and what it does is it sends a random string over to the client, over to my phone, and it's called a challenge. And the device accepts that challenge, uses the private key, and this is where the link between the two comes in, to what they call sign the challenge. In other words, it decrypts the challenge and sends back a string that the server has already decrypted using the public key, and it sends it back. And if they match, you're in. So you can see that if the server checks the answer to the public key, it knows the response came from your unique device. The word unique there is important. These devices are device specific. So I have a different passkey, maybe, on my Mac, on my desktop than I do on my iPhone for that same site. And that way, if somebody even hacks into your password manager, they're not going to get the private keys, and you will be protected. So this is why passkeys are better. Most of the major tech companies support passkeys right now. And I have Well, we'll look here in a minute. I have probably about 20 passkey sites. Amazon supports passkeys, Wells Fargo, obviously Apple, Google, Microsoft. Um, and more people every day are using passkeys. So one of the main things is it's resistant to phishing. A phishing attack is where you get the email and it says, click here, or your Outlook email is going to go away immediately if you don't click here and enter your username and password. Well, the bad guys capture that, and suddenly your Microsoft account is compromised. There's no such event that can take place here. There's no password, and so there's nothing for them to steal. They can't steal your identity because it's there's no string for that. It's stored as a private key on that device. Um, it's easier for you because it's autofilled, and uh, the requesting server initiates the call, and there's a handshake there, so you don't really have to do anything. Um, so things to remember that it is device specific. Your passkeys are being either managed by the hardware of your device or by your password manager. Now, having said all that, and saying how great passkeys are, many sites, and I encounter this all the time because I have passkeys on many sites, they still use a password as a backup. So the passkey is great for Amazon, but I still have an Amazon password, which somebody could end up with somehow. So you still need to have good password management. Now, someday in the future, probably not during our lifetime, but someday in the future, there will be sites that don't have passwords at all. They're just passkeys. Um, but you still have a password as a backup method. All right, let's wrap this up. And I mentioned Karen. Karen initially did this presentation, so it follows her outline. And I left uh, this slide in here. Karen uses Apple's built-in password system. As many of you know, Karen, she is as much an Apple bigot as I am. Her husband, who uses a PC, I believe, uses a secure Word document. She said her parents use manual password books. Um, she said if I'm using someone else's device at a library, I can open up the password app on her phone or ask Siri to look up the username and password. And I do that too. If I'm away from my devices where I haven't, the device is not running my password manager, I can look it up. Now, importantly, you don't want it to save it on that device. If I'm at the library and it says, do you want to save this password? Uh-uh. Don't do that. And most of the time, they will give you a warning about that. Importantly, she does have her Apple ID password memorized because that is the password to her password manager, essentially. Um, and she has her email, Apple ID, and device unlock codes are stored manually with her will and trust paper. I have exactly the same thing. I have in hard copy. My kids can get into my computer in my absence. And I also have a legacy contact entered into my Apple device. I think I talk about that here in a second. Yeah, here's what was you. So I use the Apple Passwords app. It is really a cool app, and it stores all my password and passkeys, and I let it create new passwords. If I'm using Windows, if I'm forced into using Windows, I use the browser uh, password manager. And there is a way to sync those with my Mac. In other words, if I have a PC and an iPhone, for example, I can actually sync those passwords, but I choose not to. It's a little complicated, and we actually have a whole class on that. And if you want to do that, give me a holler. And I do use passkeys whenever they're presented. Here's where don't do as I say do, or don't do as I do, or whatever it is. Don't do as I say, do as I do. Um, it is a slow process to move away from the old way of doing things. The first time I gave this presentation, I had 720 passwords with security recommendations, and I can show you this. It's down to 670. So I've fixed 50 of them. Yay, which is like what, not even 10% of them. And they're compromised, duplicated, or easily guessed. And in my defense, most all of these accounts are something I used years ago, one time or two times, and never used again. And almost all sites like that. And in doing these 50, I found this every single time. I went to log in with my old username password that had been compromised, and the site would not accept it, which means that they either force changed the password or they eliminated your account altogether if you didn't access their site for 3 or 4 years or something like that. So I also have legacy contacts on my Apple devices. This is something that Apple provides. And if you've attended any of North's cybersecurity or his session on cyber, what is it? Legacy, you're passing on your digital footprint. A legacy contact is a good way to start. And Apple software has that built in on your iPhone. So here's some upcoming events. Oh, this is this. I don't see I don't see smart ways for cybersecurity, but anyway, these are some upcoming events that we have throughout this summer, and we are just about to post the fall sessions for at the Senior Center through the Go catalog. Oh, I hope this is in the handout. I think quite sure it is. This is from Karen. And this is really good. This is choosing your password management method. So if your current method is this, here's some next steps. If you want to move to digital document or built-in, here's the steps. This is an excellent summary of what we've just talked about. Yeah, these are in the handout, I believe. These are some places that you can go for more information on how-tos. Ah, there we go. What do we do? Oh man, an hour, 59 minutes on the dot. Phew, that's crazy. Anybody have any questions?
Well, friends, that's a wrap. We hope you've enjoyed this video today. Hey, before you go, if you like this video, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. And if you'd like to know when the latest SCTC video comes out, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. And if you have any ideas or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Be sure to leave a comment below. We'll see you next time.